Every week, millions of people move home, and as it's one of the most stressful things that you'll do in life, you need to get it right. I'm Rebecca Jane, and together with the region's best property experts, we'll be giving you some top tips and expert advice, shining a spotlight on a different area from across the Midlands, and getting to know a little more about our guests and what they look for in a home. Property is ever evolving and always a fascinating subject. We'll guide you on what you need to know and what you need to look out for here on Midlands at Home. Hello and welcome to Midlands at Home. On this week's show, we'll be taking a look at property through the eras, from the stunning Georgian builds, Victorian, Edwardian, Art Deco houses, through to modern new builds. Plus, later on in the show, what premium and architectural house style can add to your property and the most popular styles that you love. My guest today is Matthew Moore from Edwards Moore. Matthew, welcome back.
Hello again.
No, back again.
Yes, indeed.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what I love about properties is the various styles of architecture that we have in the UK, because my goodness me, there is so much choice, and how it's evolved really over the years.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we're very fortunate in this country. We have a number of different styles. We can see how building has progressed through the ages and changed as the sort of heating styles have changed and what have you. And in certain areas, there is quite an eclectic mix of properties, which makes areas a bit different and a bit quirky, which is quite nice.
It gives us the character, doesn't it, that I think, you know, we all love. I mean, take it right back to Georgian. I absolutely love the Georgian properties, the big sash windows, how they're beautifully symmetrical. That's kind of a very popular style, isn't it, don't you think?
It is. I don't think you're the only one who loves Georgian style at all. I think it is... it's just so attractive, really, and I think it is the symmetry that makes it so attractive, of course. You often think of opulence because a lot of the Georgian buildings that have survived through to today are in the more opulent areas, so larger country houses and what have you.
On a good plot of land, aren't they?
Absolutely. Or you've got the areas like the Royal Crescent in Bath, which is beautiful. It really is stunning, and you know it's nice just to have a wander along there on a Sunday afternoon, and you really feel like you're transported back into the 18th century, if you like.
Yeah, very true. I suppose the only downside, because my brother lives in a Georgian house, is that you know, it takes a lot to heat, because obviously big rooms, big ceilings, and you know, with the sash windows, perhaps not so great in terms of with your heating costs, as beautiful as they are.
I don't think they had domestic energy assessors back in the 18th century, unfortunately. So or solar panels, or so they were built for a different era, and they were built when people had fires in every room, basically.
Horse and carriages, you think of that sort of.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
So you know, in order to heat a property like that, every room would have its own individual fire, and you know, you'd have somebody who would go and light the fire in every room.
I know my brother says he's got an Arga, and that sort of heats a part of the downstairs.
Yes, absolutely. Ranges were a big part of it, and they would have maybe some sort of heating system that connected to that range. But as I say, it was a different time. And
what time was that? What was the era for Georgian?
The era really was the 18th century, so sort of 1740 through to 1830 when the Victorian era started.
Yeah.
So,
and that actually brings us on to Victorian, which is the next era. So talk us a little bit about Victorian builds.
Well, Victoria, it's quite a wide era, if you like. There's an awful lot of building that took place, an awful lot of different styles that took place during the Victorian era. I think we normally tend to think of Victorian townhouses, Victorian terrace properties and what have you, particularly in this area where there's an awful lot of that type of build.
Yeah.
But there's some beautiful architecture, such as the Victorian law courts in Birmingham, of course, which really do stand out. So, yeah, but arts and crafts, Art Nouveau, they all came within that Victorian era. So it's quite a diverse time for building, really.
Yeah, tell us about Art Nouveau, because that's sort of the next era on, Art Nouveau style houses and what we would expect perhaps from a property like that.
Art Nouveau, Again, it's just they tend to be a little bit more modern. It was a precursor to the Art Deco time, of course, so they were going for something a little bit more off the wall, if you like. So you had your you had your traditional building styles, and Art Nouveau just changed it up a little bit for somebody who wanted something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's it. And then we've got Edwardian. So what's the difference? We've just spoken about Victorian. I think people can get confused on the different styles. Talk us a little bit about Edwardian style with properties.
Edwardian properties don't tend to be quite as decorative as Victorian properties. You tend to find that the window panes are slightly larger as we were able to make glass much easier and make larger panes of glass which were much more effective. I think people tend to get a little bit tied up with, well, you know, the Victorian era ended and then the day after they started building a different type of property.
Yes.
That's not in reality how it works, of course. It's all evolution. So buildings evolve. So they were building properties in the Victorian era and they carried on doing that. You know, Queen Victoria died, King Edward came in, and the building carried on, but it just evolved slightly as you got different fuel types, you got different building techniques. Really, things progressed in that respect.
What might we find from kitchens? You know, kitchen styles from in terms of size with Edwardian and Victorian houses.
Kitchens varied. Obviously, the larger, more opulent properties had very large kitchens, of course, where they would have a number of people working in them. The terraced houses tended to be smaller. My great-grandmother had a scullery that was actually outside, so she used to have to actually go outside to go to her kitchen. So, you know, quite different to how we see it today. What you tend to find in Victorian properties today is that people have made more of the kitchens. They often had outhouses, Victorian and Edwardian properties, and they've knocked those through into the kitchen because people maybe don't need the storage but want more space inside so they can have a breakfast table.
That's it. We want big kitchens nowadays, don't we, to accommodate all the families? So
exactly. I think in Victorian, Edwardian periods, people didn't eat in their kitchens. People had a separate room in order to eat in, and that was where the work took place, whereas these days, the kitchen's the heart of the home, and people want to do everything in there. People have got tellies in there, and settees, and dining tables, and all sorts. So, you know, people's style of living changes, and architecture reflects that. Yeah,
definitely. Now, let's talk about pre-war and then post-war, because I suppose when we think of pre-war and post-war, lots of separate rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Pre-war properties really, again, reflects the times and the era, what have you. 1930s, probably just after the Great Depression, of course. So there was some skimping on materials to a certain extent. So you often find in 1930s properties, the ceilings will slope down towards the walls where they reduce the number of bricks that they used.
Good gardens, would you say, they're generally?
Generally plots, I mean, we weren't short of land because the population was that much smaller then, of course. So land wasn't really at the premium that it is today. So you often find that they have good-sized gardens.
A bit like the 70s. We moved to the next era, 70s, great plots, nice big, you know, well-proportioned rooms, aesthetically perhaps not so pleasing, but again, nowadays with rendering and everything else, you can change perhaps the look, but you get the land and you get nice big rooms with your 70s, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I always look at 70s houses and think that they're a blank canvas to a certain extent. Not necessarily the most interesting time of building because they tended to build boxes to a certain extent. But, you know, it is what it is, and that was what people wanted at that time, of course. But these days you can extend, you can bring the front out, you can change the front, so you can certainly change the look of them, but the layouts are often excellent in the 1970s. They were.
I lived in the 70s about 10 years ago. Brilliant sized rooms, you know, and a great plot. So we look at then new builds coming up to what we have today, and what do you now get with a new build?
You often find that the plots are smaller because land is very much at a premium these days, of course, and when builders are building, if they buy a plot of land, they need to maximise their take from that land, if you like, so they increase the density very much so. So often gardens are small. I live in a property that was built 12 years ago, Georgian style property. So the look of it is great.
Yeah.
But I've got two boys and the garden isn't ideal, unfortunately, because we tend to spend most of our time in the next door neighbours' gardens retrieving footballs, of course.
Of course, as you do.
Indeed.
That feeling.
But, you know, you've got energy efficiency to a certain extent. The building regulations had changed. So built with cavity wall insulation, much increased loft insulation, often thermalite block internal skin to the property as well. So you get improved energy efficiency. Room sizes reflect modern living, so often larger breakfast kitchens and what have you. More bathrooms, again en suites.
And they are thinking of the look, don't you think? They are trying to bring in new Georgian builds or different eras. They're trying to incorporate that into new builds, so they still look like they've got some character. Whereas I think perhaps sort of 10 years ago, new builds, they might have looked all exactly the same. They are trying to think a bit more of the character, aren't they?
Very much so. I think they're trying to create communities, if you like. And I think when everybody feels like they're in a different house to the other one, then it creates that community, and people aren't just numbers living in exactly the same style of property, of course. And they go a lot more for green areas, more communal green areas, if you like. So, you know, the planners are very conscious, particularly when they're doing larger estates, of making sure there's enough recreation ground close by to give people that bit of space.
Yeah, that's it. We all want that space and then that lovely look. Right, don't go anywhere, because after the break we'll be taking a look at this week's Spotlight area, plus looking at one of the oldest homes in the West Midlands. So see you in a few minutes. This week's Spotlight area is Aldridge. Aldridge is a town within the metropolitan borough of Walsall. Historically, it was part of the county of Staffordshire, but in 1974 it was incorporated into the West Midlands county, where it also became part of the borough of Walsall. The first mention of Aldridge is in the Domesday Book of 1086. Aldridge began as a small agricultural settlement, with farming being the most common occupation up until the 19th century. In 1666, there were only 93 households in Aldridge, and the population of the village increased slowly to 736 by 1801. After the Second World War, people and businesses moved into Aldridge from the congested parts of Birmingham. Large new housing and industrial estates were developed, and the population increased from 11,500 in 1921 to 26,500 in 1981. The old shops and the cottages of the high street were replaced by a modern shopping centre. Most of the town shops today are located either on High Street, Anchor Road, or in the shopping area known as the Parade. There are a number of independent shops, an indoor market, and a big supermarket just outside the town too. Aldridge also has many takeaways and restaurants, so whether you fancy a Chinese, Indian, Greek, pizza, or just good old-fashioned fish and chips, you'll never get stuck for choice. Aldridge is a relatively affluent area with good schools, amenities, a shopping centre, restaurants, good transport links, and near open countryside too. Happy days! You'll certainly find some fabulous property that may come with a little bit of a price tag, but then location always commands a premium, and as they say, it's all about the location. The lovely Aldridge. Matt, this is your patch.
Yes, I've been selling houses in Aldridge for 18 years now, and always lived fairly close to it. My father was born and bred in Aldridge as well, so yeah, I know it reasonably.
So what did he love about Aldridge?
I think it's very convenient. It's so close to everything. You're 10 miles away from Birmingham, you're 4 miles away from Walsall, you've got Sutton Coldfield, Sutton Park.
It's got everything really, isn't it?
It has. You've got access to the motorway networks. Plus, it's very much got a community spirit. I mean, people think about Aldridge now. It has become more of a town as it's grown and it's evolved. There's quite a lot of small light industry there as well. But it's still very much got a community feel, which is the great thing about it. We're in the process at the moment of doing Britain in Bloom, and
it looks lovely at the moment, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It looks super. It's really nice because a lot of the local shopkeepers and business people have really put the effort in to try and make it look better, which is great. People are taking pride in the place.
There's that great sense of community, like you said. And talk to us about house styles in Aldridge. They really vary.
They do. I mean, Aldridge is very much a semis town. It's quite an old village, if you like, so it was mentioned in the Doomsday Book. And you've got properties there. There's some properties, I've sold a number of them. You've got Moot House, which apparently dates back to the 14th, 15th century. You've got Shutcross House, which is a beautiful Georgian facade on a property that, again, dates back to probably the 15th century. Original parts of it have been dated back to that sort of era. You've got Cedar Court, which is a very fine example of Georgian architecture as well. That's now been split down into separate apartments.
Right.
But they're stunning. And then all the way through the ages. I lived in a property that was built in 1860. Aldridge is known for its bricks, and it was a brickmaker's cottage.
Okay.
So I couldn't hang any pictures because I couldn't get a drill to go into the walls, unfortunately. But, you know, and you look at the old maps and you see that it was just a lane then, and now it's quite a major road with a bus route and what have you. The majority of building work probably went on in the 1930s. There was a big local philanthropist called Henry Boot, and he bought a lot of private rental. He built a lot of private rental properties in the area, and they're now super starter homes. They really are 2 and 3 bedroom semi-detached houses, nice gardens.
Need more of those, don't we?
Yeah, we do, definitely. And then obviously pre-war there was quite a bit of building, some nice 1930s semis and what have you, and then an awful lot of 1950s semis, and then it carried on from there really, some 1970s properties and some more new build, and there's still new build going on today.
Absolutely. I think talking about these different styles, there was a recent article actually which revealed the top 10 village house styles that we apparently love. Number 1, I think, will be no surprise, which we've mentioned, which is the Georgian style, the Queen Anne. And actually, you've got the Duke of Duchess, haven't you, of Cambridge, of course, live in Amner Hall, which is a 10-bed Georgian. And we spoke about the symmetry, the sash windows, the character. So that came up as number 1. Buyers look for an extended kitchen, breakfast room, and of course these widely appeal to everybody, downsizers, families, professionals. I think Georgian houses do, don't they?
Just beautiful, aren't they, really?
That's it, just beautiful. What more can you say? Number 2, new build Georgian. Well, absolutely. I mean, you said yourself, living in a new build Georgian, how lovely, because you get the best of both worlds. You get the character, but actually you're going to get the good insulation. And what windows do you have in yours, out of interest?
They're UPVC. But they are a sash style, so they're made to look like a sash window.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does. It looks nice. It is very symmetrical. It's double fronted, which is great. But as I say, it's got those extra bathrooms and the breakfast kitchen and things like that.
Excellent.
Just need a bigger garden.
Yes, there we go. Can't have it all.
No.
Number 3, local vernacular. Haven't heard it called local vernacular. Basically, 2-bedroom farm cottages. You know, as you were saying, 2 up, 2 down.
Yeah, that's it. Often you find them in slightly more rural areas, so on the edges of villages, if you like. So they were probably built as farm worker cottages. So again, land wasn't at the premium, so decent plots of land, and then they've been extended beyond recognition in many instances, of course. But the original part will often date back to Victorian times, and nice characterful properties in nice spots.
History, definitely. Well, number 4 is Elizabethan. Number 5, Victorian, which we mentioned before. Number 6, Edwardian. Number 7, eco-friendly. Number 8, medieval, which is quite rare to get medieval style.
Not many in Aldridge.
No, exactly, not many in Aldridge. Arts and craft houses come at number 9, and tech. Number 10 was mock Tudor. So they were the 10 various styles. If you're living in a house, Matt, and you don't quite know the exact era, how might we find out the date of our property, where it dates back to being built?
If it's built in the 20th century, if you like, you'll probably find that the deeds will give you an idea of the date that it was built, or the date that the land was sold, and give you some good history often, particularly in sort of 1930s properties. The history can be quite interesting in that respect. If it dates before that, then really and truly you have to go back to old maps and see whether the property appeared on old maps. There's a great website which is oldmaps.co.uk, funnily enough, and you can go on there and you can go back through different stages of mapping So you can say, well, the property was there then, but it wasn't there then, so it was built somewhere between 1830 and 1860 or whatever it is.
Because it's nice to know, isn't it? Nice to know the kind of pinpoint it down where you live.
Well, people take an interest in their properties, and people like the idea of history and what have you. So, it's great, I think, to take an interest in it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, one of the oldest properties, one of the oldest buildings, is the Lad in the Lane, which is in Erdington. Now, it dates back to the 1400s. It was a home to a family with high status, and then in 1780 it was converted into a pub. So that's one of the oldest buildings anyway.
To be honest with you, it's unusual because most of the pubs in this area I've been into, so I'm not aware of that.
Well, you don't know, you'll have to try that one.
I will, yeah,
it's
definitely.
in Erdington, so there you go.
Not far.
What would be one of your favourite eras of house styles?
I think definitely Georgian, but again, as I've said on a number of occasions on this programme, you know, I think that the house style, the house type, it's all about location at the end of the day, and people will always buy based on location as much as anything. I think aesthetically a Georgian property is beautiful, but again, often these days they're listed, of course. So if you want to make any improvements, you have to get confirmation through the listing authority as well as the local authority. And they can often be expensive to make improvements too.
True.
Whereas more modern buildings are easier to change and adapt to your style of living. So I think a lot of it is down to where it is when people are looking to buy, but people do buy with their heart as well. So I was
going to say, funny you mention that, because I think, you know, when you walk into a house, regardless of the era, even location, you know, when you walk in, you know within the first sort of 5 seconds, don't you, whether it's going to be a home.
Houses
have that feel, doesn't it?
Houses have vibes.
They do.
When we market a property these days, we put so much information on the internet. We can put 15, 20 photographs of the property, floor plans, virtual tours, all sorts of things like that on there. But you still have to view that property to get a feel for it, and people will buy. Often people have made that decision within 15 seconds of walking through the door because they've got that feel for it. Yeah,
that's it. So I suppose if you've got... And some people do have a particular house style. Do you find that some people go in and they say, you know, I'd like a Georgian or I'd like a Victorian, or are they a bit more, I don't mind an older property, or I don't mind whether it's new?
I think people start looking and they'll have an idea, they'll have their utopian property that they want to buy. I think in reality, when it comes down to it, they start looking around and they think, well, actually, I haven't got that much choice, so I have to adapt my requirements accordingly, of course. Some people do, and what you tend to find is there is a group of people where location isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all. So, people do have certain requirements like that.
Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
Pleasure.
Good that you've got the 3 peaks, haven't you?
Yes, indeed.
Tomorrow,
yes.
so good luck for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you more next week on Midlands at Home.